Hey everyone, welcome to a deep dive into the mind of Naval Ravikant.
You want to unlock your potential, build some serious wealth, and cultivate a happier life.
Well, buckle up because we're diving deep into the almanack of Naval Ravikant.
That's Eric Jorgensen's compilation of Naval's wisdom.
It's like having a cheat sheet to a better life, but instead of just giving you the answers, we're breaking down how Naval thinks.
It's one thing to hear Naval's famous one-liners.
But we're going way past the sound bites today. You ready for this?
Let's do it. You know, people often associate Naval with getting rich.
But if you dig deeper,
It's more about building wealth and not just piles of cash. He's talking about those assets that work for you, even while you sleep.
it's funny, I always thought of wealth as just how much money you have.
But Naval's definition really shifts your perspective. It's about owning things that generate value, whether that's a business, real estate, or even a really strong online presence.
And you know what's key to that?
Leverage. Naval talks about it constantly finding ways to amplify your efforts so you're not just trading hours for dollars.
Think of it like this.
Instead of just working at a company, what if you owned a piece of it? That's equity, and that's where things get interesting.
You're not just earning a paycheck. You're participating in the growth of something much bigger.
Exactly. And the internet has completely changed the game for this.
Think.
Joe Rogan thinks Scott Adams they've built empires by sharing their unique perspectives online.
This wasn't really possible before.
Okay, so how do we figure out our own path to building that kind of wealth?
Naval says, forget chasing the hot job.
It's all about identifying your specific knowledge.
He actually recommends looking back to your childhood.
What felt like play to you, even though others might have seen it as work.
That's where those unique talents often reveal themselves.
He gives the example of someone who always had a knack for sales,
Or maybe they were a natural musician.
or even just incredibly detail-oriented.
It's about those natural strengths you might not even realize are valuable.
Exactly. And once you pinpoint that specific knowledge, you've got to find ways to productize it, to scale it.
Imagine someone who understands real estate but also loves technology.
They wouldn't just work at a real estate company. They might create the next Zillow or Trulia.
Instead of just getting a job, they created something new by combining their existing knowledge with technology.
And here's the key. They took ownership. Naval's big on embracing accountability, even if it feels risky.
He says putting your name on your work unlocks societal rewards, more responsibility, owning a piece of the pie, and that leverage we were just talking about.
I remember reading about how he actually faced some pushback when he started publicly talking about philosophy and psychology.
He was known as a tech investor back then.
And yet, by taking that risk, he opened up a whole new chapter for himself, built even more credibility. He's all about pushing past those comfort zones, even when there's a chance of failure.
And he really emphasizes building genuine, long-term relationships, especially in the business world.
He's all about playing the long game, not just chasing quick wins.
He often talks about his relationship with investor Iled Gil as a prime example.
They consistently support each other. Knowing those strong bonds create huge benefits over time.
Like they always say.
A rising tide lifts all boats.
It reminds me of that idea of building social capital.
Nurturing those relationships that become invaluable assets down the line.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another crucial point: patience.
Naval's clear that building wealth, especially through genuine creation, takes time. It's like planting a tree.
You wouldn't expect to eat fruit the next day. You nurture it, give it time, and eventually you get to enjoy the rewards.
You know, it's interesting you say that because Naval also talks about luck.
But he doesn't see it as some random force,
He actually believes we can cultivate luck.
which I find incredibly empowering.
Exactly.
He talks about how constantly chasing the next big thing, that anxiety of nexting, keeps us from being present.
From really appreciating what we have right now.
It's like we're always living in the future, never fully experiencing the present moment.
And you know what Naval says is a key to quieting that monkey mind?
Meditation.
He's a huge advocate for it, seeing it as a way to tap into that peace and clarity that's always available to us, if we just slow down enough to notice.
I love that he describes enlightenment as the space between your thoughts.
It makes it feel less like some distant state we need to achieve and more like a state of being we can access throughout our day.
He even calls meditation intermittent fasting for the mind.
Which I just love. Just like we can train our bodies to be healthier by fasting, we can train our minds to be calmer and more focused through meditation.
It's such a good analogy.
Now, switching gears a bit, Naval also dives deep into cultivating happiness.
Which really resonated with me because for a long time, I thought happiness was something you just found,
It's easy to fall into that trap, but Naval's very clear. Happiness is a choice, a skill you develop.
Like he's saying.
You wouldn't expect to be physically fit without putting in the work, right?
Right.
It's the same with our minds.
Exactly.
He's very open about how, about a decade ago, he wouldn't have rated his own happiness very high.
It just wasn't prioritizing it.
But through conscious effort, things like meditation, cultivating inner peace, surrounding himself with positive people, he actively raised his own happiness baseline.
He's proof that we have more control over our happiness than we often think.
It's so inspiring.
And it reminds me of something else he talks about, the importance of acceptance.
He believes a lot of unhappiness stems from clinging to desires that clash with reality.
Now that really struck a chord with me.
How much energy do we waste fighting against what is, instead of accepting it and moving forward from there?
So much.
And that's not to say we should just become passive or complacent.
It's more about recognizing that real, meaningful change can only come from a place of acceptance.
Exactly.
And speaking of creating change, Naval's also big on the power of habits.
He believes that just as we can transform our physical health through exercise, we can transform our mental well-being by cultivating good mental habits.
He even offers this very practical step-by-step guide to building new habits.
It's not just about willpower. It's about setting yourself up for success by understanding your triggers, finding substitutes for negative behaviors, and getting support from friends.
And it's also big on reducing sugar and social media.
Arguing that those things can really weigh us down mentally, just like too much junk food weighs down our bodies.
It's like he's saying,
treat your mind like the precious, powerful instrument it is. Feed it good stuff. Give it time to rest and recharge and watch what you're capable of achieving.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another major theme of the book, unlocking your potential.
One of Naval's most thought-provoking ideas is that there are no adults.
That stopped me in my tracks the first time I read it.
What does he even mean by that?
He's saying that deep down, we're all just figuring it out as we go.
And instead of looking for someone to tell us the right answers, we should embrace the freedom that comes with realizing that we get to write our own rule book.
I love that idea.
So often we're looking for external validation, but Naval's encouraging us to become our own authorities.
He's a huge advocate for independent thinking, even if it means going against the grain.
He uses the word contrarian.
But not in the sense of just disagreeing to be difficult.
He's talking about having the courage to think for yourself, to question assumptions, and arrive at your own conclusions.
He has this great line.
Very smart people tend to be weird since they insist on thinking everything through for themselves.
I love that. It's a celebration of individuality, of embracing our own unique way of thinking.
And one of the best ways to cultivate that, according to Naval, is through reading.
He's not just talking about skimming headlines. He's all about diving deep into books, especially those that challenge our thinking and offer lasting insights.
He actually says the more you know, the less you diversify.
Wait, so the more you learn, the less you need to branch out. That seems counterintuitive.
It's because as you develop a deeper understanding of core principles, you realize those principles can be applied across a wide range of fields.
So it's about going deep, not just wide.
That makes sense.
He also has some really interesting advice for dealing with those tough decisions we all face.
Oh, totally.
Like, what if you're stuck on a decision completely torn between two options?
Most people would say,
flip a coin.
But not Naval, as he says.
If you cannot decide, the answer is no.
He's all about clarity.
If you don't have it yet, wait for it to emerge.
Don't force it. He also has this other heuristic, which I love.
Which is?
If you're evenly split on a difficult decision, take the path more painful in the short term.
So often, one path is just delaying the inevitable pain. By choosing the path that's harder up front, you're tackling it head on, potentially avoiding bigger headaches later.
It's kind of like ripping off a Band-Aid.
And I think he applies this run-uphill approach to a lot of things, like building wealth and cultivating happiness.
He's not afraid of challenges.
He sees them as opportunities for growth.
Exactly. And you know what else he talks about? Breaking free from rigid labels. He calls it being chaotic neutral.
So not letting ourselves get boxed in by expectations.
Exactly. Being adaptable, open to new experiences, and constantly evolving.
And that ties into his concept of true freedom.
Which is freedom from?
Freedom from anger, from constantly reacting to everything, from needing other people's approval all the time.
It's about mastering our internal world so we can navigate the external world with more clarity and purpose.
And that's something I think a lot of us are craving,
More inner peace, more agency over our own lives.
Absolutely. And to achieve that, Naval argues that we need to build our own frameworks for living fulfilling lives, rather than blindly following someone else's blueprint.
He's all about questioning everything, testing ideas for yourself, and creating a life that's uniquely yours.
He's really encouraging us to step into our power, to take responsibility for our own lives, for our own happiness.
Absolutely. And it's fascinating how much Naval emphasizes the importance of understanding and leveraging our own minds.
It's like he's saying,
your mind is your most powerful tool, but it can also be your biggest obstacle.
It reminds me of that old saying, your mind is a wonderful servant, but a terrible master.
Exactly. And Naval's a huge advocate for developing mental strength, for cultivating that sense of inner peace and clarity that allows you to weather any storm.
He talks about anger as a destructive force.
And I think that's something we can all relate to, right? How often does getting angry actually help the situation?
It's like he says,
anger is its own punishment. It just creates more suffering for everyone involved.
So much of his wisdom is about shifting our perspective, about choosing to see things differently.
Like his idea that
life is going to play out the way it's going to play out. There will be some good and some bad. Most of it is actually just up to your interpretation.
That's so powerful. It's not about trying to control everything.
It's about controlling our reactions to things.
It's that classic Stoic philosophy.
It's not about what happens to you.
It's about how you respond to it.
Exactly.
And when it comes to creating a life we love, Naval reminds us that the current environment programs the brain, but the clever brain can choose its upcoming environment.
So we have the power to shape our environments, to surround ourselves with people and experiences that uplift us, that challenge us in healthy ways.
That's exactly it. And that ties back into his emphasis on building strong relationships.
He talks about how important it is to
pick business partners with high intelligence, energy, and above all, integrity.
He's definitely a believer in surrounding yourself with people who bring out the best in you, who share your values and your vision.
And who challenge you to grow. Naval's also a big believer in seeking out mentors.
But not in the traditional sense.
He's more about finding wisdom wherever you can, from books, from podcasts, from real life experiences.
I love that.
It's like he's saying,
be a student of life. Always be learning. Always be growing. And don't be afraid to experiment, to test things out for yourself.
And you know what? He's not afraid to call us out on our BS.
Like with this one.
There are no get-rich-quick schemes. Those are just someone else getting rich off you.
Ouch. That's a wake-up call if I've ever heard one. And it speaks to his emphasis on creating genuine value, on building things that last, that make a real difference in the world.
Absolutely. And speaking of creating value, you know what else Naval emphasizes? Owning equity.
He's really clear.
You must own equity, a piece of a business, to gain your financial freedom.
I remember reading that and realizing that so many of us are just trading our time for money.
We're building someone else's dream instead of building our own.
It's so true. But when you own equity, you're participating in the upside potential.
You're not just earning a paycheck, you're building something that can continue to generate wealth even when you're not actively working.
It's about creating those assets that work for you even while you sleep, which, when you think about it, is the ultimate form of freedom.
It totally is. So, with all of that in mind, what stands out to you from Naval's wisdom?
Honestly, there's so much. But if I pick one thing,
it's his emphasis on building those mental models, those frameworks for understanding the world and making better decisions. It's like he's giving us the tools to become our own gurus, our own wisest advisors.
It's about taking ownership of our lives, of our happiness, of our futures.
Exactly. And for me, that's incredibly empowering.
So to our listeners, we ask, what one habit could you implement today to start building that wealth, cultivating that happiness, or unlocking your potential?
Maybe it's starting that meditation practice we talked about.
Or finally taking the leap on that side hustle you've been dreaming of.
Whatever it is, take that first step.
Embrace the challenge.
And remember Naval's words.
Ultimately, you have to take responsibility. Save yourself.
And you know what? Don't just take his word for it. Question everything, experiment, and see what works for you.
There's a lot to ponder here. As Naval would say, it's all about building that judgment, making those hard choices that lead to an easier life in the long run.
Until next time, keep diving deep.